I understand.
How is everyone this afternoon? Everybody. Hey, Forrest. Nice to see you.
Hey, Colin.
Can't beat the weather outside in DC today.
It's very nice.
Too hot.
Watch your words. Next one's coming.
Yeah, that's right. It'll be too cold from November to March, so you're right.
Yeah, I've only been in DC for 6-ish months now, less than that, so I have not experienced all of the seasons yet. So
Ugh.
this will be my first winter. The summer was pretty good.
Well, you never will experience them all in DC. You have to go to Maine or Minnesota or someplace for that.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, how are you guys?
We'll give everyone a couple more minutes. People are still filtering.
Yeah.
We want to get everyone in.
I'm always curious, does anybody actually have their lunch with them now, or did they already eat and then come on? I eat and then come on usually.
Yeah.
You too?
I just ate.
Just say yep.
Yeah, it's been a while since we actually had a luncheon where we ate
Yeah.
food together.
Yeah, where we ate food, yeah.
Almost 2 years at this point.
Yeah.
Crazy. Hopefully soon, you know.
We are thinking about, maybe doing some quarterly in person, right?
Right, maybe a quarterly happy hour, something along those lines, just to get something in person.
Yeah.
All right, so I think I'll go ahead and start the intro, and people will continue to filter in. Great. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining. It's really great to see so many people here. And I think as a dump truck drives by, I think the best thing here is to just jump right into it. So we're really, really happy today to have Charles Lewis with us. Charles Lewis is a professor of journalism at the American University School of Communication in Washington, D.C. And he's the founding executive editor of the Investigative Reporting Workshop. Lewis is a former ABC News and CBS News 60 Minutes producer and has founded 2 Pulitzer Prize-winning nonprofit news organizations, the Center for Public Integrity and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which was the first global organization of investigative reporters to develop and publish online multimedia exposés. The ICIJ has famously published the Panama Papers, the largest collaboration in the history of journalism. Lewis is the author of a number of books, and in 2018, he was awarded the I.F. Stone Medal for journalistic independence. In 2009, the Encyclopedia of Journalism called him one of the 30 most notable investigative reporters in the US since World War I. And with that, I will turn things over to Mr. Lewis. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Connor. It's a pleasure to be here today and to say hello to everyone. I'll try to be as succinct as I can, but I'm not a spring chicken, so if I get into details here, they might be longer than I try to make it succinct as possible. So I'm a native of Newark, Delaware. I grew up on Main Street in Delaware, and my ancestors on my father's side go back 300 years, believe it or not. I grew up on the poor end of town, East Main Street, and it was actually a wonderful time, but it was the poor end of town as well. Anyway, my father worked at General Motors. My mother was a secretary in a high school. And anyway, I went to the University of Delaware, political science major, right, which is in Newark, Delaware. And after that, I went to Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, which is a 2-year master's, and about 25% of the people quit in the first semester because they didn't want to read 3,000 pages or whatever it was per, I don't know if it was a week or 2 weeks, but it was massive reading. It was a 2-year master's. You had to go be in front of a board of native speakers, usually Spanish or Portuguese. Anyway, I got through it, but it was a little nerve-wracking, but I got through the master's there, 2-year master's. Anyway, I went to work at ABC News. I'll try to make it as succinct as possible. There are a lot of funny stories around it, but there were 600 applicants to go to ABC News in the fall of 1977, and I had already gotten a rejection letter, but I kept calling the secretary, and I guess I'll confess, I slightly wheedled my way into an interview with Sander Van Oker, a well-known correspondent for NBC and ABC. At that time, it was ABC. And the secretary said that she could only get me 10 minutes with Sander Van Oker. And I had already gotten a rejection letter, which I ignored. So she introduced me and called me in to meet with Van Oker. And I had 10 minutes, and I had done a lot of homework. So I'd been reading all of the scoops and all the big stories that in most cases had not really been fully covered. One was about hair dyes causing cancer that was at the National Cancer Institute. And so I mentioned it to Van Oker, who's a very famous correspondent, was with both Kennedys when they were shot as a correspondent. And essentially, I told him that hair dyes cause cancer and that there was data at the Cancer Institute, and that if it was not, someone's got to expose it. And he looked at me. I was this young pup, 21 years old or something, and I'm in a group of 600 applicants. Anyway, he hired me on the spot. My first salary was $17,000. And my first assignment was to go to Alabama and investigate the Ku Klux Klan and church bombing. Anyway, I'll spare you, but so I was in it, so to speak. And it was really thrilling. Sander Van Oker was sort of a legendary character. Wallace Westfeld was ahead of Huntley Brinkley, who was his number 2. And I was 23 or 24 years old working for these pretty iconic figures. Cassie Mackin, very famous correspondent, who subsequently died of cancer, but she was a brilliant correspondent. She was in the office. So I had been at the Wilmington News Journal for 4 years, working in the sports department, and now I'm at ABC News at that moment. So it was a really wild and crazy, but kind of exciting time. I ended up going to 40 states across the United States, investigating various subjects. And eventually, after 6 years, I was an off-air investigative reporter for ABC News. At some point, essentially one day, Mike Wallace called, the 60 Minutes correspondent, and he had a voice that was down around your feet somewhere. I can't do a deep. Well, I can't go that low. But anyway, he had a broadcast voice, and he called up and said, how come you're still at ABC News? You should be over here with us at 60 Minutes. And I said, well, no one asked. And he goes, well, do you want to work for me or not? And that was my entree to leave ABC News after six and a half years and going to 35 or 40 states. And so I had 1 week, talk about nuts. I was married and I had a small daughter and a 1 or 2-year-old daughter. And I had to, if I wanted to do this, I had to go from Washington to New York in a matter of a few days because 60 Minutes wanted me to be Mike Wallace's investigative producer. So I did it. And I was at 60 Minutes for almost 5 years. I produced 11 investigative 60-minute segments. They all led the show. Usually there's 3 segments. The lead segment is kind of the one that is the big one that sets things off. And I think all of mine, 10 or 11, were lead segments. At some point, I decided to, I got angry at 60 Minutes because they were protecting well-known gazillionaire in New York that also ran a company, and he would always take Don Hewitt, the founder of 60 Minutes, and take him to the Hamptons. No one wanted to drive on the highways because it was too much. The highways are kind of tough getting to the Hamptons. A tough life, I guess. And so anyway, what happened is basically Don Hewitt essentially dictated to me that I had to remove the name of the guy that I just mentioned, who was 5 white guys who were working through Japan, and they were hawking their wares in an advertisement. And I wanted to use it for my story, which was about investigative reporting and also money and things like that in New York and in the country. And Don Hewitt, the founder of 60 Minutes, who was a close friend with the fellow who I just mentioned, who was head of a company, didn't want to do the story. And he kept trying to get the story on the air, but I was not budging. I wanted to show this picture I had from Japan of all these folks working for the Japanese, which was part of the story. The long and short of it is I had no choice but to compromise and to acknowledge that he could do the picture. And Don Hewitt and we delayed the segment for quite a while, but finally it aired. It was nominated for an Emmy. It was my 10th or 11th segment, and all mine led the show because I was Mike Wallace's producer. And what happened next is I quit. I broke a contract and walked out the door because I felt that Mike Wallace and Don Hewitt were both, they lied a lot, and they were tough, and they were doing things that were kind of bullyish and nasty. And I had been in TV at that point 11 years, 2 networks, and I decided it was time for me to go do something else. So I literally quit and walked out the door. CBS was upset. The president of CBS News reamed out Mike Wallace and Don Hewitt and said that it was terrible that they had done this to me. And they tried to get me to come back, and they tried to offer me a lot of money, and I had it. So that was a kind of a key part in my life. This is all between 1977 and 1988, between 2 TV networks. What happened next is I started I had worked for the Wilmington News Journal in Delaware. I'm a native Delawarean. Family goes back hundreds of years. But anyway, what happened after all this is I created a nonprofit called the Center for Public Integrity, based in Washington, 2 blocks from the White House. It started from my house, but eventually we got an office 2 blocks from the White House. And the staff, I built the staff up to 40 people, full-time employees. And anyway, it eventually won the Pulitzer Prize in 2013. I had left by then. I started in '89 and went through 2004, and there were numerous awards and all kinds of things. But the Pulitzer did not occur until 2013. I had already left. There was another organization I founded that also won a Pulitzer Prize, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. And that project was the Jedi Knights, I called them, of the preeminent investigative reporters literally in the world. I'm not kidding, in the world. That organization won a Pulitzer Prize in 2017. I had founded the center and the consortium. So that was kind of exciting, in addition to starting the Center for Public Integrity earlier. So anyway, all those things played out. I ran the center for 15 years. We were sued by Russian billionaire oligarchs for a story about Dick Cheney and oligarchs in Russia. I'm not making this up. And the Russian billionaire oligarchs wanted to destroy the Center for Public Integrity. The staff was 40 people, and we had libel insurance, but the rate for the libel insurance went from $17,000 to $125,000 in about 3 or 4 days, because they didn't really want to get sued by the Russian billionaire oligarchs for obvious reasons. They're rich and they want to sue. And so that was a really rough period, going back a bit, but to explain all that. But the good news is the Russian case was thrown out by a Republican judge who appointed, a Republican who was appointed by a Republican, George Bush administration. And at the same time, they dismissed the case against us by the Russian billionaire oligarchs. So talk about dodging a bullet. We didn't have any bullets coming at us, thankfully, but we did manage to get past this, at that time, something of a crisis. The Center for Public Integrity would have collapsed completely if we had been sued, and successfully sued. The organization would have gone from 40 people to 0. Instead, we won the lawsuit, and the place went up to 50 people. And I, at that time, stepped away and went on to do other things. So anyway, those are some of the background of starting from ABC News, then to CBS News 60 Minutes, then the Center for Public Integrity and the International Consortium from '89 to 2004, and then since then I've been doing other things. I'm now a professor at American University. I'm in my, hold on to your seat, 16th year here, and I'm a full tenured professor, and I teach in-depth journalism and international investigative reporting, which is the one I teach this semester. And as I mentioned it, I've been at this is my 16th year as a professor at American University. So that's, that's sort of my official story, as they say. I have a wonderful wife, Pamela Gilbert, who ran the Consumer Product Safety Commission with 500 people under her. She does the checkbook, not me. And anyway, we have a great life. We live out in Virginia, 3 miles from Mount Vernon, up along the Potomac River. And I have a son. We have a son who lives now in Los Angeles. He wants to make movies. And anyway, that's sort of, I guess you would say, my story, and I'm sticking to it. I can talk about other things. I was very fortunate yesterday. What happened yesterday is, and I didn't see this coming, but I was, an organization called the Institute for Nonprofit News has over 200 nonprofits all over the United States. Actually, I beg your pardon, it's 300 nonprofits. And the Center for Public Integrity was the 3rd nonprofit when I started. Now it's over 300. And so yesterday, the Institute for Nonprofit News basically gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award, because no one had done had done all these investigations across the country. And so I'll spare you what was said, but it was a very nice gesture. The head of INN, Institute for Nonprofit News, is Sue Cross, and she and many others gave talks yesterday, literally yesterday, I didn't plan it in conjunction with our conversation, but it happens to be in the last 24 hours. So anyway, that's all the sort of the career stuff. Just because everyone apparently is an Eagle Scout, I now want to switch to scouting a little bit. I grew up in Newark, Delaware. St. Thomas Church was the sponsor for Troop 17 in Newark. My family has gone back hundreds of years in Newark. I don't live there anymore. I live in Alexandria, Virginia now. But basically, what happened is over time, things change, and that's where I ended up. I now here as a professor, and I've been a journalist for 40 or 50 years. I've also written 6 books. The last book was 935 Lies. The Future. I have all these books over here, but anyway, they're all investigative books. I did 3 Buying of the President books, and a Buying of the Congress book, and the 935 Lies book was the most recent book, and that is one where I literally counted lies involving the Iraq War, and that's a long story. But anyway, so my favorite maybe beginning work I skipped over was the Wilmington News Journal. I was in the sports department, and I worked from 6 till 1 in the morning, and then I had German class at University of Delaware at 8 o'clock in the morning. But take a gun and shoot me. But anyway, everything. But that was fun. There were people yelling at each other, and in the newsroom, and we used to. Because when it rained and you didn't have anything to report in the sports department, we would wad up paper, and we'd get a yardstick and pretend we were batting in the newsroom. And anyway, being a journalist was and still is actually fun. And I've always enjoyed it because you get to gather information from everywhere you can possibly find it. You gather information first, secondary and primary written material, and you don't talk to a human about any subject matter or anything you're exploring. You don't do that until you've read all your stuff first. You have to literally steep yourself in what you know and what you should know and what's available before you ever talk, if you can. It doesn't always work, but anyway. So anyway, I'm happy to stop here. The Lifetime Achievement Award was sort of a surprise yesterday. There's 310 or 20 nonprofits in the United States. When I started the center, it was the 3rd in the US. That was really an exciting moment. I didn't know they were going to give me a Lifetime Achievement Award. It just so happened it occurred yesterday. So with that, I'll stop, and I'm happy to talk about anything you guys would like.
So I thank you very much. I think probably the first thing to say is congratulations. I didn't know that, but congrats on the Achievement Award yesterday. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, I never had one of those. That's pretty fun.
That's fantastic, really.
Thanks.
So to everyone in the audience, if you have questions, or it sounds like even any particular area of career or journalism or whatever it may be that you'd like to hear Charles expand on, feel free to put it in the chat. I guess my starting question to you would be, clearly you've worked on a number of different projects, starting, all the way back from the hair dye question that you posed. Out of all of them, is there one that you feel has been the most impactful, or that has just been your favorite to work on?
Boy, that's a hard question. It was 6 books. I'm trying to. I appreciate the question. I do.
You can do a top 3 if you want to.
Well, the one on the lies book was fun because I literally counted the lies. There were 7 top U.S. officials, and it was around the time of the Iraq War, and I literally there were statements made about weapons of mass destruction and all this stuff where they were all saying the same thing, like a mantra. almost. And it was all on in a way to start the war, essentially. And, I'm not a warmonger, and I'm not an anti-war. I'm just a regular guy who tries to track information. I'm a journalist. And I was startled by all the things I was hearing and seeing. And I sort of felt that that the one thing I didn't understand, they had a thing about weapons of mass destruction, and they would say this phrase all the time. They were all coached to say it. And there were 6 or 7 of them that said it. So we actually tracked, I'm not making this up, we tracked every statement by every public official, some 7 or 8 of them, the top, all the public relations types, and also not just public relations, the president, the vice president, and all the other people. And they had all said these things about weapons of mass destruction. And in the end, there were no weapons of mass destruction. The whole Iraq War was not what it was proposed to be, and so behind my head, sorry, I'm not very good at this. Over here, behind me is 935 Lives. That's the book cover. But I mean, literally, we tracked every false statement by 7 members of the Bush administration. And they had all said they were doing certain things and that they were asserting various things. And almost everything they said was not true, ultimately. And that book was well received in a lot of quarters because people weren't sure it was, what the administration was saying was correct. So anyway, most of the books I did were things like The Buying of the President. I did 3 Buying of the President books, which were very thorough about both parties, Democrats and Republicans. Same with Congress, The Buying of the Congress, massive, thick book because Congress is complicated, to put it mildly. And we were taking different parts of Congress, subject areas, I mean, like banking and, various subjects for paragraph, or not paragraph, chapters. And so as all that was collected, then we no one else was doing these books. We were tracking what people said, what they did, where it was based on. Were there documents that they actually cited? We're like anal retentive journalists, investigative reporter types. And I had 40 people working for me, which was kind of exciting. It was also not a lot of sleep. I was getting 4 to 6 hours of sleep if I was lucky, all those times that I was there. So I was at ABC News and CBS News 60 Minutes for a total of 11 years. Anyway, I'm glad that I did it, and I'm glad I left. And then I started these nonprofits. I'm now on my 4th or 5th nonprofit. The Investigative Reporting Workshop is here at American University. We have done 15 co-productions with the TV show Frontline. We've had Frontline in our building until recently. They unfortunately, after 15 years, have run out of money at WGBH in Boston. But anyway, by partnering with all these outstanding and respected organizations and awards that we've also won, and also the books and the articles, it has been a great run. And the Center for Public Integrity, when I started it from my house, was only the 3rd nonprofit in the country. And as I said, now there's 320 nonprofits. And the folks who gave the Lifetime Achievement Award yesterday were the INN, it's called Institute for Nonprofit News. That came from, I mean, they are the ones that did that award. I didn't ask for the award, but of course I'm very appreciative. I was startled and almost shocked by it. But anyway, I'll stop here. We could talk about 100 things, and I'm yammering on longer than I probably should have. So I'll stop.
That's okay. Question from Thomas. He says, "Hi, Charles. Given your experience with politics and news media and the loss of ground truth has in people's minds today, in your opinion, how do you feel we can get back to a norm of commonly accepted sets of facts?"
That's a terrific, spectacular question. And it's really hard to do the answer because, you know, in a way it starts in school. You know, the children lie, or their parents allow them to lie. I mean, this is a wonderful question. It's also elusive, to put it mildly, because everyone's different. People are different. There's some people that are very straight arrow, careful folks, and they are very cautious about not saying anything that's incorrect. And there's other people that are fast and loose and will say whatever the hell they want, you know? And so it's really hard to generalize about this. It's the old cliche, to each his or her own. I mean, people say what they want to say, and there's some people that bald-faced lie, and there's other people that are really trying cautiously to be measured in what they say and proper in the facts they're uttering, hopefully. And so that's tricky stuff. You know, and I'm not, you know, just to show you how crazy this world is, when I was at 60 Minutes, we had a fellow who was stealing people's notes and files from each other. And this was a 60 Minutes producer. And I didn't use the word snake, but the fact of the matter is, this one fellow who had won awards and done stuff, but he would go into someone's office and literally pull stuff out of their desk drawers. And I was like, these are supposed to be colleagues, and they're supposed to be 60 Minutes with high standards, you know. But I saw a number of these kinds of things. I'm not trying to pick on poor 60 Minutes. It could be ABC News, it could be newspaper, you know, but people do have different sort of truth-telling elements, shall we say, either zero or a range, shall we say. And I've seen it at all levels, honestly. And it's depressing to acknowledge that, but it happens to be true. I'll stop there unless you want to go deeper on that one.
A question from Colin. What are your thoughts regarding the impact social media has had on journalism?
Well, I'm a little bit of an old-fashioned guy. I like reading the newspapers, and I like reading books or writing books, either one. And I'm cautious about loosey-goosey, you know, utterances and things that people do. I mean, sound bites, you know, do you know we once had 44 seconds was how long a sound bite was? And you know that we're down to lower than 6 seconds now. How does anyone say anything meaningful in this country with 6 seconds? And so that's just one little example, but our culture and a lot of our daily realities are kind of tough, and we rarely acknowledge them even. And it does affect the quality of I think, of our democracy and facts and truth. You know, facts and truth, we'll say, facts and truth, what's that? But anyway, I do get frustrated by those kinds of things. I guess I'll get over it someday, but not yet.
So I'm curious, and this is sort of just a personal curiosity. Can you talk a little bit about the Panama Papers? And, you know, we've all seen kind of the articles about them, but your perspective of them as an investigative journalist, and also the investigative journalist who founded the organization that ended up publishing these papers.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I created the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists itself, but I know the folks, you know, at the helm of it now. The consortium was an idea that I basically created it in 1997, and it has evolved over time. The ICIJ is just a magnificent organization, literally with journalists on all 6 inhabited continents, and hundreds, I think more than 200, I called them Jedi Knights, you know, investigative reporters of great excellence at all levels, doing journalism across the world. And the most recent big expose that the consortium did, I believe, had 600 journalists working on this project globally. Can you imagine? There is no news organization in the world that has 600 journalists covering the world. That is exciting. I mean, no offense to the New York Times and a lot of the other big papers, no one has 600 journalists tracking stuff like that. So the fact that the consortium exists and the fact that it holds people's feet to the fire and exposes things that need to be exposed, uses millions of documents. In 2 or 3 cases, there were more than 10 million records, literally papers and records that they have pulled together, obtained, and then they have sent it out to the hundreds of their colleagues within the consortium. That never happened ever in the history of the United States before the consortium. That is, it's still unbelievable to me. I'm thrilled about it because frankly, it was my idea. It took me from 1992. Let me get this straight. Yeah, 92 to 97 to find the money to create the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Now they're getting money from all over the world, from foundations and individuals, both in US, but also throughout Europe and even Asia. And so there is no internationally respected investigative reporting organization that is any deeper or greater than the consortium. So that is a thrill to watch, honestly. And I'm delighted with how they're doing. I'll just say it that way.
That's great. A question from Forrest. Has your career ever touched or included the US military?
That's a great question. It hasn't, I haven't really frontally tried to investigate the government and particularly the military or the Pentagon. It's a very hard place to penetrate. It's an understatement. It's a great question. I remember one time when John Hinckley tried to kill President Reagan. We chased him in a car from ABC News at the time, all the way out to out into Maryland, or no, Virginia, I guess. And we had to sleep overnight waiting to come into the place where the guy who shot Reagan, I forget his name, I should know the name. Anyway, he was being held in the brig on the Marine base way out in Virginia. And I'll never forget it because they had 2 dummies that came out of the courthouse first. And there were journalists at every corner, literally 4 corners, looking for which car was Hinckley. And we followed him and found him and slept all night. And then we went to the base and they told us to get the hell off the base. But we knew he was there and we knew where he was being held in the equivalent of a brig, or a jail of sorts on their site. But I'll never forget it. And of course, this is where the media comes in, where the media hates all the other media. So we were the only ones who drove all night and got down to the location. We knew where he was. There were no other cars from other networks, just us. And that was kind of neat. And in silly media land, being the first is always impressive. People like you to be, especially your bosses, like you to be first. And that was a wild one, to put it mildly, because there were 3 or 4 cars that had someone like Hinckley in the back seat, literally coming from different parts of the courthouse. And I think the 3rd one that came, we thought I had to guess. I was doing I was the journalist with a camera crew, and I had to decide of the 4 camera crews ABC News sent, I had to pick which car that came out was the actual car. So I had 3 or 4 Hinckley-like characters with raincoats and kind of looked similar. And I lucked out. I picked the guy that actually was Hinckley. It was like the 3rd Hinckley. The others were not Hinckley's. I mean, but they looked like Hinckley, you know, a raincoat and they would duck a little bit and all that. And so it was, it was pretty interesting. I mean, it was crazy too. And then of course, when we're racing, it's following the Hinckley, frankly, just to know where he was being taken. We're on the radio, but we're afraid if we use our radio, it'll get connected with other radios, with other networks. So then we were told not to say a damn thing while we were in the car going to where they were taking Hinckley, which was quite a ways away. And anyway, and I'll stop there about that. But yeah, that was a really interesting time. I was also there when Reagan was shot. Actually, I mean, when he was on the ground at Hilton Hotel, and there was a fellow who had been there, Senator Ross of Delaware. I'm from Delaware. His person was not killed, but maimed for life by being shot by Hinckley. I also was sent to Colorado to investigate Hinckley, including the underground shooting gallery where he practiced how to use and kill, which he then, of course, did by shooting Reagan months later. So I saw where he was living. I saw where he was learning how to shoot. And I was doing that on assignment for ABC News. They asked me to go look into Colorado, check it out, what really happened, all that kind of stuff. So from chasing Hinckley down the road to going out to Colorado and finding out where he lived and all that stuff, all of those things are what an investigative reporter does. And that's what I was supposed to do at ABC at the time.
So through that experience as an investigative journalist, you've actually been kind of on the scene and in the area for a couple different things that have occurred. I know when you spoke at, and for folks listening, the context of how I met Charles is he was my commencement speaker at University of Delaware. I graduated with the same political science degree. And my memory is probably bad, but I know when you spoke there, you mentioned something along the lines of a car bomb assassination that occurred in Washington, D.C. Was that something were you there for that? Did you know the people involved? I don't remember what it was, but that story made it pop into my memory.
Gosh, I'm trying to remember. I don't remember the car bomb. I mostly remember Hinckley. I'm not saying it didn't occur. I just mean, thankfully, I've never been in a car bomb. But I, you do get paranoid a little bit when you're going places and you wonder if there's someone that might pull something like that. I mean, the Hinckley Reagan thing was really quite extraordinary because a very famous journalist named Hal Bruno, a Bulldog reporter, I'm not sure if he's still with us anymore, but he and I were on the third floor of ABC News's offices, and we heard sirens, and we knew something was up. And Hal Bruno was a fireman, basically. He would always go wherever things happened. Sirens were there. He was there, even though he was a journalist at ABC. So he and I said, come on, we got to go. And so we jumped out and got a cab and went up to the Hilton Hotel. And literally Reagan was on the ground and there were ambulances. And I mean, I'll never forget that moment ever. But then I also tracked for a full week out in Colorado the whole story of Hinckley, who he was, what he had done, where he lived, and all those things. And that's just one case of an investigative project, if you know what I mean. I didn't do a biography of Hinckley or anything like that, but when you're an investigative reporter at a network, you end up going to 40 or more states and you interview people and you track subject areas on all levels. And part of the fun of being a journalist is just getting to go places and to meet people and to investigate subjects. And honestly, now I'm just a professor. It's not like they put me out to pasture, but I much prefer investigating the bastards than I do teaching and all the other things. I mean, I'm not, I have had a great life. I'm not complaining, but I find investigating much more interesting than anything else, honestly.
Awesome. Thank you. A question from Anders. How do you feel journalism has changed since you were working in television in your early years to the way it is today?
Great question. Well, what has happened, one thing that's happened that is really notable to me, at least, is we now have over 300 nonprofits. When I started the Center for Public Integrity from my house, and eventually we were 2 blocks from the White House on Farragut Square, it started with me literally personally starting getting the office and hiring people from 1 or 2 up to 40. So anyway, doing that was something you don't forget, but I'm not sure I'm answering your question. Can you tell me again what you just said, or ask? Let me get it right. I want to make sure I'm not going off the rails here. On Anders, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Anders.
Yeah, I just kind of want to know, like, what you think of the 1970s, 80s era of journalism and television journalism, and how it's really changed to 2020 and this era. I mean, personally, I did a little bit of journalism in college, and a lot of the papers we wrote about were how there's so much more competition, so much more news being put out because of the internet being able to do that. So what are your thoughts on it?
Everything has changed for sure. I mean, we started with 3 nonprofits, and now we have 320 nonprofit news organizations in the U.S. That's incredible by itself. But why do we have 320? Well, part of the reason is we've lost thousands of journalists. And I forget the number of journalists. It's at least 6,000, but a lot of journalists were cut. You know, they ran out of money, frankly, news organizations. And so that's a real problem. And so while we have all these nonprofits now trying to help fill the gap, a lot of the commercial, we did lose 600 newspapers that literally are no longer, which is really sad. I mean, newspapers were always like the best thing to read, really. It wasn't TV. TV has 10-second sound bites, for God's sake. I mean, we went from 44 seconds literally down to 6 or 8 seconds now on sound bites in television. So print is really what we would ideally like. Well, guess what? A lot of Americans don't want to read the papers, honestly. That's a whole nother issue. Most Americans watch 5 hours of TV a day. Can you think about it? 5 hours a day. We're not talking Meet the Press here. They're probably watching sports or other things, but it's still kind of sad in a way. There's a lot of fast and loose kind of elements here in terms of information, the extent to which people actually read newspapers. That's a whole nother subject. I mean, a lot of people don't even get a newspaper. They might have radio, hopefully, but there is a really large knowledge gap, ignorance gap, whatever you want to call it. There are a lot of people that don't really want to know about the news. They don't want to read much about it, magazines or papers, and why we've lost 600 papers is not unrelated to that. And so I think that's really quite serious. And in terms of schools, you know, I don't think public school, I mean, I love public school. I went to public school, but you know, when you're moving fast and you're trying to teach things in like history and civics and stuff, that's fine. But there's really not a whole lot of there when it comes to substance that really sticks with people. And of course, a lot of people don't go to college, as we know. I mean, so, you know, we do have significant issues regarding ignorance and just good old fashioned people not wanting to spend 5 or 6 hours a day in television, on television is crazy. but a lot of folks across America, that's what they do. And the number of people across America that read the best newspapers, not too many, right? I mean, we have the Times and the Post and the Wall Street Journal, our three best newspapers in America. We've lost a lot of other papers, as I noted, and I don't think that's getting any better, probably. And it's just, I'm not trying to depress everybody, but I'm being realistic, I think.
Thank you. So I think we're getting to the point where we're close to closing out, and there was a question I saw here that I think is actually maybe a pretty neat one to end with. And so your thoughts, but also the question is from Ed. Where do most of your students go on to work? I'm curious to hear what they envision as the future of investigative journalism. And so I would ask you, not only what is their thoughts on the future of investigative journalism, but yours as well.
That's a great question. There are a lot of folks who want to be journalists. I teach them myself. I mean, not just me, but communication studies and journalism studies are at most colleges and universities in America. Then the question is, where do they get hired? As I mentioned before, we've lost 600 commercial newspapers, but there are still, I don't know the numbers, but probably a few thousand papers still in this country. So a lot of, like, for example, here at American University, we have journalists who come in here, get their master's, and then get hired at a newspaper somewhere in America. That happens a lot, thankfully. And so they come in with training, whether they're an undergrad or they're a grad, if they've done both degrees, undergrad and grad, and they're studying journalism, they're going to be completely ready. We've had 13 of our students who work in our little investigative reporting workshop here at American University. 13 of them now work for the Washington Post. Are they lucky as hell? Yes. Is that, but the fact is, colleges and universities that teach journalism, one of the purposes of those things is to get them set up to go become a professional journalist and to know how to do it. And by the way, their knowledge of the technology is probably greater than a lot of journalists who have been working for 40 years but don't track every single little thing. There's so many new things happening now with technology that that is an important element also. So there are a lot of journalists who are coming out of colleges and universities who do go into journalism. They don't get paid a lot, but it's prestigious, and it also, you got to get a foot in somewhere to do get a job like that. And we see, because I teach them. I'm in my 16th year of teaching here at American University. We watch these people, and they go, and they almost all of them get jobs, which is really heartwarming and good to know about, because I would be very worried if no one got jobs. But the fact is, they do get jobs, and that's important, and that is a good thing. So I'll feel okay with that, I guess.
Thank you. So for those who have been listening and maybe now say, this has been really interesting, I'd love to read a little bit more of what you've done, what would be the best way for someone, on the call now to get access to or read some of the work that you've done in the past?
Well, if I started and run the investigative reporting workshop. If you go to the investigative reporting workshop online, there are about 20 or 25 articles that I've written just in the last 10 plus years. So that one way to do it would be to go to the website Investigative Reporting Workshop and just look at, under my name, I have all my articles I've written. It doesn't have to be my articles. We also have done 200 or more news stories. Again, that's the Investigative Reporting Workshop is the name, .org. So that's one way it can be found. There's there are all these larger entities like INN, Institute for Nonprofit News, that has 320 nonprofits. You can actually look up all those nonprofits if you're into doing that. Anyway, there are other things too, like I mentioned, books, but there's other things people can do and should do across the board in all the media forms, I think, whether it's books or it's articles or it's interviews that become written work that is used in another way, perhaps. But anyway, the good news is there's a lot to investigate. I would say there's no shortage of things to investigate. And while, I mean, honestly, I wish we had more journalists doing investigations. But, the good news is we have journalists and they do that, and nationwide they do it. So I'm, as my father always said, do the best you can. That's all I'm trying to do too.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone give a virtual round of applause to Mr. Lewis.
Oh, you're very nice. Thank
This
you.
has been really interesting, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
It's great to have someone from UD come. It's very rare to find a UD person in DC, so that's a nice experience. Before we all go, and we might have a few minutes to go into breakout rooms, but probably not actually. But I want to turn things over to Colin real quick, Colin Tredone from the council, for any announcements.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for coming out today for this month's lunch. Thanks again for Charles coming out to speak. It was great. Just had a couple little things, just very briefly. I just wanted to share some, progress that we've made in scouting over the last few months, just some good news to share. We've actually added almost 4,000 new scouts since August 1st at our council. So it's really great. A lot of kids this summer were able to enjoy camp again. We had camping in full swing with no COVID related incidents or anything of that matter. So, things are looking up for scouting, and it's a really great time at the council. On that note, with all the new scouts we have coming in, I always just want to say, if you want to extend time, volunteer in any type of way, get more involved, just always reach out to me. I'm your guys' contact. I'm an Eagle Scout myself, and I'm the person that you can, reach out to from the offices if you've got any itch to get out there and get more active. It doesn't have to be money. It can be time. It can be whatever you want to do to get more involved. We'll always take any sort of help from fellow Eagles who know so much about the program and its impact it can have. That's really all from me. Thanks again for coming out. Don't want to take too much time with this announcement section. So back to you, Connor.
Oh, that's great. And always important to get involved. What's the old saying with scouting? It's only an hour a week. But I think it's really important to have that alumni involvement, especially since I think DC probably has one of the coolest networks of Eagle Scout alumni that there is. And so that's why I'm glad this group has sort of started to grow a little bit, because there's just so many fascinating people here. But I think that's all for us. It's 12:58. So thanks for joining us for lunch, and we'll let you guys get back to